Now, sometimes you have to escalate to de-escalate. That's according to senior Trump administration official Scott Bessent, while Iran launched successive waves of missile attacks on Israel, including cluster munitions again. In the last hour, the Ministry of Defense has said that RAF Typhoon and F35 jets have continued their defensive missions, while a UK counter-drone unit managed to shoot down an Iranian drone during the night. Last night, 2 ballistic missiles evaded Israeli air defences in the south of the country, injuring more than 150 people, and a reminder of the threat still posed by Iran. Dimona last night. Whoa. Same strike, different angle, just a few miles from Israel's nuclear weapons facility. A tit for tat, the Iranians said. Soon after, Arad, also southern Israel. First no sound, then with sound. No one was badly injured in this flat. This is just a small taste of what civilians have endured in Iran and Lebanon, where thousands have been killed in airstrikes. But by Israel's standards, last night was bad. Lives brutally interrupted by a war their government had told them was unavoidable, but that until last night, here at least, scarred only their imagination. Dozens of people who didn't make it into their shelters were injured here last night. No deaths, though, recorded, and frankly, that is a bit of a miracle. But psychologically, for a country that thought it had the upper hand in this 3-week-old war, this is deeply damaging and troubling, because clearly some of the ballistic missiles from Iran are getting through. And now the Israeli government wants you to think that what Iran has done here could also happen in Europe, thanks to the Iranian missiles fired at the US-UK base in Diego Garcia yesterday.
The range of the ballistic missile can cover entire Europe. This threat is not a threat only on Israel. It's a threat on large parts of Asia, all of Europe, and large parts of Africa. The Iranian regime is a real threat for the entire region. This is the face of the Iranian regime.
Why did this missile get through?
Well, we have had so far great interception rate, over 90% intercepted. We'll study what happened here and get better. We always want to be 100%, but even the best defense systems in the world are never 100%.
So when Trump and your Prime Minister said that basically they had taken out the ballistic missile program, that wasn't true, was it?
Well, we've taken out a lot of their capability. The amount of fire has gone down 80, 90% of the amount of fire, and we've done a great job, and we're going to keep pushing forward to make sure that even the few that they're firing right now, we're going to prevent them from firing those as well.
Israel may want this war to be as existential for Europe as it is for them, but they're also worried that Trump could pull out early, because Iran has managed to turn a war of choice into a war of economic necessity that Trump didn't want and is now losing. In the Strait of Hormuz, once a pub quiz question for shipping nerds, we're all getting a geography lesson these days about this narrow waterway and shipping death trap. And Trump has weighed in overnight as only he can or must. In this post, he threatened to obliterate Iran's power plants if the Strait of Hormuz isn't opened within 48 hours. From what we know about the regime's resistance so far, it is hard to see them caving in. They've already put up with daily and nightly bombardments and could escalate the conflict by hitting desalination plants in the Gulf. This reaction to Trump's threat was sent to us from Tehran by an opponent of the Iranian regime.
The only thing this does is punish and weaken the people. It doesn't harm the regime. For them, water, electricity, food, security, and welfare are not important. For them, what's important is their pride, their weapons, and their borders, even if the price is that the people of Iran perish one by one.
On the economic level, this war has already gone global. Fuel rationing in Sri Lanka leading to long queues. And in Thailand, they're telling people to turn off their aircon and wear lighter clothes. Newsreaders lead by example. Back in Arad, next to the missile crater, we come across Israel's chief diplomat. Foreign Minister, is the war that you and America started 3 weeks ago getting out of control?
No, I don't think so, because you must understand that in war when you take a lot of risks, complications from day to day. We are strengthening and we are successful in achieving our military objectives, in achieving what we wanted when we went to this operation.
This is also an election year, and every major bomb crater, including this one, is used for campaign purposes. Here today, the man seeking re-election. The war that he started is broadly seen as necessary, but it hasn't made him more popular. We met Flora, local resident. What would you say to the Prime Minister, Netanyahu, if you could?
What would I
say
to him?
What would you say?
Go home. Just go home.
You're in favor of the war against Iran, but you don't
Yeah.
like the Prime Minister.
It's not one, you're doing it like, do you want a pizza or you want a shawarma? No, it doesn't work that way, okay?
So what is it? You have both.
I want Iran to get lost.
The damage here is significant, but nothing compared to the 16,000 or so strikes Israel and America have conducted in Iran so far. They are winning on the military front, but this is also a face-off between bombast and resilience, with a real potential for more escalation. Well, earlier I spoke to Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery, who spent decades in the US Navy and is now a senior director at the Foundation for Defense of Democracy's Research Institute in Washington, D.C. I asked him whether President Trump's 48-hour deadline would work.
So I don't, because I think the Iranians at this point are just responding to everything we do. Like if we attack their power plants, they'll launch further attacks into the energy systems. Now, I don't think they'll be as successful as U.S. and Israeli combined air campaign will be against their power production facilities. So he will do cost imposition on Iran, and it will hurt Iran. It'll hurt their economy. It'll hurt their security, but also hurt their population. But I don't believe that alone will open up the Straits of Hormuz.
But also, I mean, hitting a civilian power plant that gives power to the civilian population, that's a war crime, isn't it?
Historically, we don't attack power plants that uniquely service, say, a hospital and with no other reasonable backup power supply, because that would be intentionally causing harm to civilians. But we do attack power plants on occasion, especially when they're aligned explicitly to military systems. So some of this can be done.
So, Rear Admiral, you know a lot about what it's like to try and get ships through the Strait of Hormuz, in peril. How difficult is that? What are the kind of threats that the Iranians could use, and what could, the Americans do about that?
I'd say any surface warfare admiral like myself has probably done 25 or 30 up to 40 Straits of Hormuz transits in their career, and none of us would say they were stress-free. So they're always stressful because you didn't really know what the Iranians were up to. In this case, you can assume bad intentions. So they're very dangerous. And you have to worry about, in today's environment, you have to worry about anti-ship cruise missiles, drones, air drones like Shaheds, unmanned and manned surface craft coming at you at 30, 40, 50 knots, packed with explosives or with grenade launchers. And then finally, mines. So to handle that, you need a multi-domain defense.
And can that only be done at the end of the day, to a sufficient degree of reassurance for the tanker companies and the tanker crews if you actually put boots on the ground in Iran, or is that not necessary?
I think if you properly do the air campaign plan and you properly equip the defensive forces, you can do this without boots on the ground. The key to this is to have a prompt strike capability airborne and sufficient defensive systems between the planes, the ships, and the helicopters to knock down any threat that comes.
And do you need the Europeans for this mission, or can you do without them? And do you understand why the Europeans don't really want to take part?
Well, I think the president's learned that if you spend 14 months slagging off your allies and partners and then ask them for help, you amazingly don't get an initial thumbs up. From Europe, we could really use minesweepers.
So Britain has a role to play in this?
Oh, Britain has a role to play. A Type 45 destroyer would be useful, and minesweepers. The problem with minesweepers is if they start now, they're probably 35 days away from being in the Persian Gulf with a little bit of readiness time plus transit time.
In economic terms, this is already a kind of world war. And then you've got the willingness to escalate. You've got a very resilient Iranian regime. There's no hint of people going onto the streets to force regime change. Where does all this end?
If the strategic end state is change the regime's behavior so it doesn't threaten its Arab neighbors in Israel and the United States and Western interests, then we have some work to do. The one thing you can't do once you start this is stop halfway, because if we stop halfway and just kind of set back the Iranians, they'll be back sooner. But if we also leave them in charge of the Straits of Hormuz at the end of this, then they'll always be in charge of the Straits of Hormuz, and they'll be able to use it as a tool to threaten their Arab neighbors and the United States, and particularly our Western partners who are reliant on that fossil fuel in a way the United States isn't.
Final question to you. The Israelis here, and I've spoken to government officials all day long, are making a huge deal out of the fact that the Iranians apparently fired 2 missiles, ballistic missiles, at Diego Garcia yesterday with a range of 4,000 kilometers, which is much further than we thought they were able to fly. I mean, how serious is that? And when they talk about, or other people are talking about possibly hitting Berlin or Paris, how seriously should we take that in Europe?
Well, seriously, I worked in U.S. European Command when we, not with a lot of support from NATO, installed Aegis weapon systems in Romania and Poland that were oriented towards the threat from Iran. So I'm glad we did. And NATO did support it, but I would just say they kind of looked at me with an askance eye, you know, like, why are we really doing this about Iran, really? And well, it turns out, really, it is necessary.
But to be clear, you're taking that threat very seriously. You think that they've got that range, although many people seem to think they didn't. They've got it, and therefore we should take it seriously.
Yes, I believe it's a legitimate threat, and we should be careful, and we have to help the British with the defense of Diego Garcia as well.
Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery, I guess you could wear that T-shirt that says, been there, done that. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Lebanon's Prime Minister has claimed that Israeli attacks on bridges over the Litani River in the south are a dangerous escalation and could be a prelude to a full-scale invasion. Israel said it had attacked routes used by Hezbollah. Our Foreign Affairs correspondent, Sikander Kamani, is in Beirut. Sikander.
Well, Matt, Israel had already attacked 3 bridges in southern Lebanon in recent days. This one today was a particularly important one, linking the city of Tyre with the rest of the country. It was targeted this afternoon following an Israeli warning beforehand. Israel's defense minister says it's because Hezbollah has been moving fighters, weapons across these bridges. That may well be true, but bridges are clearly civilian, not military infrastructure. And the real aim, many here suspect, is an attempt by Israel to cut off southern Lebanon from the rest of the country and for Israel to occupy at least part of it. Also today, the Israeli defense minister said he had ordered the army to ramp up the demolition of Lebanese homes along the border, along the model of what's been seen in Gaza.
And how is Israel's ground invasion progressing?
Well, relatively slowly so far. Israel has said today that it's killed the head of Hezbollah's special forces, but clashes between the two sides are still taking place in border towns. Hezbollah can do very little against the Israeli airstrikes, but they remain an effective guerrilla fighting force. They're still firing into Israel too. 1 Israeli man killed in the north of the country this morning. Interestingly, here in Lebanon, I've been speaking to some grassroots Hezbollah supporters. They told me that initially they were angered by Hezbollah's decision to resume attacks on Israel, knowing the destruction that would then entail. Now a war has begun, they say. They're firmly supporting Hezbollah again.
Sikander in Beirut, thank you very much indeed. Well, Israeli opposition MPs have condemned violence by extremist settlers against Palestinians across the occupied West Bank last night, demanding immediate action to arrest those responsible. Dozens of attacks were reported overnight and more are unfolding today. At least 11 Palestinians have been injured in direct violence against residents, while vehicles and homes were set on fire. Harry Fawcett reports.
In the early hours of this morning, streaming into the Palestinian village of Jalud, Israeli settlers out for what they call revenge. Israeli media say this was part of an hours-long campaign organised by the self-described King David's Brigade of far-right settlers. The intruders are in the village of Karayut, says this man. More than 20 attacks over a wide area, settlers throwing explosive devices, Molotov cocktails, beating Palestinians, throwing stones at their cars. The immediate trigger, the death of Yehuda Sherman, an 18-year-old settler whose all-terrain vehicle was in a collision with a Palestinian pickup truck yesterday. Police initially treated it as an accident. The Palestinian driver said to be under questioning, having handed himself in. Today, Sherman's brother, who was also in the vehicle, told reporters it was a deliberate attack, that they'd been chased and rammed off the road. Even before that, Israel's far-right finance minister Bezalel Smotrich, a family friend, said Sherman had been, quote, murdered guarding our country. Opposition members of Israel's parliament have been likening last night's attacks to anti-Jewish pogroms of the 19th and 20th centuries, one calling it part of a policy of terrorism and ethnic cleansing. A surge in settler violence in the occupied West Bank has seen 6 Palestinians killed just since the start of this month. The Palestinian Health Ministry says more than 1,000 people have been killed by settlers and Israeli soldiers since the October the 7th attacks of 2023.
Usually it's not hundreds of settlers, it's just dozens of settlers in each event, each assault. And yesterday they just called everyone to go out and do pogroms simultaneously. So it happened all over the West Bank. They are not ashamed of it. They spread it. They call everyone to join them. So the army and the police and the Shin Bet, they are aware and they chose not to do anything about it.
Last night's violence has been condemned by the Israeli army. The Israeli police say it's under investigation. But despite its scale and duration, no arrests yet reported. And this afternoon, after the funeral of Yehuda Sherman, more calls for revenge already being heeded. Settlers filmed invading a cemetery, attacking a village, as this violent campaign goes on.
Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer is due to hold an emergency Cobra meeting on Monday to discuss the impact of the Iran war on the economy. Faced with the prospect of spiralling prices, the government's cost of living czar has called for a temporary cap on the profits made by petrol retailers and energy firms to stop them making more money out of this crisis. Our Home Affairs correspondent Andy Davis has more.
The financial fallout of scenes like this in the Middle East continue to percolate around the globe. Energy infrastructure deliberately targeted, the economic artery of the Strait of Hormuz still all but blocked. Tomorrow the Prime Minister will chair another emergency Cobra meeting with senior ministers and this time the Bank of England's governor. The impact of war on cost of living pressures clearly a key agenda item. One forecast has gas and electricity bills potentially rising more than £300 a year on average after the next energy price cap ends in June. Those using heating oil have already been hit. Rising bills, said one energy firm boss this morning, are likely inescapable, noting that it's oil more than gas affected by shipping blockades.
So the loss of gas through the Strait of Hormuz being closed is about 3 or 4% of global gas. So the impact on gas and therefore on electricity bills should be lower than the impact on oil. So my gut feel is that you'll see more of an impact of this at the petrol pumps than you will in bills.
It's already happening. According to the RAC, in the last 3 weeks, petrol is up 10p a litre, diesel 20p a litre. That's already prompted government ministers to call in industry chiefs to warn against so-called price gouging.
And that's why we've said so clearly that we won't tolerate unfair practices either here or anywhere else in the industry.
The industry has rejected claims of overcharging, but more pressure came again today from Lord Walker, the government's cost of living champion. He told the Sunday Times he'd asked the government to consider a temporary profit cap, if needed, to stop producers and retailers exploiting the crisis for profits. Was that a good idea, this minister was asked?
Well, the government is taking a lot of action to support people through the cost of living. It's not only the action we took around heating oil when the prices of that spiked. We've extended the national minimum wage to give 3 million of our lowest paid workers a pay rise. We've extended childcare to help struggling families. We keep the situation under review. Lord Walker's entitled to his view. That's not currently government policy.
But the government will be all too aware of how quickly overseas wars can shape fiscal policy. A £35 billion support package followed Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The course of this war in the Middle East and the cost of its economic shockwaves to people in the UK still far from clear.